Hamptonio. To manipulate history is to manipulate consciousness. And to manipulate consciousness is to manipulate possibilities. And to manipulate possibilities is to manipulate power. Welcome, welcome to the show. Look like a little sun is shining outside. I took a quick glance. Hey, hopefully, I really didn't look at the weather this morning. I think it's going to be a good day today. I don't know. I don't know. But we got a great show for you today. Always trying to bring you some good information. But before I get started, I kind of neglected to talk about what was going on for actually the whole weekend, Friday and Saturday. Sister Vale Scott was putting something together. Vale Scott's Healthy You. It's free. It's a summit. It went on. It started yesterday, and it's going on today as well from 10 to 6. That's going to be at South Point Hospital. If you don't know what South Point is, that's on 20,000 Harvard Avenue. That's in Warrensville. Okay, you may have to register. You may have to register at 224. Let me see what that said. 1585 or 1383. I'm sorry. 224 1383. They got some heavy hitters that is going to be appearing today. Dr. Milton Mills and Dr. Jessica Ruff. Dr. Milton Mills is an advocate for plant-based diet and controlling disease through diet and nutrition. Hopefully he'll be there today because it was a 2-day workshop there. Merle Furry, she's an RN. She's a CEO of a plant-based nutrition movement and members of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. Then they had a guy that they was bringing in, I think, via video, Dr. T. Colin Campbell. He's the author of the China Study, known for his advocacy of low-fat, whole foods, plant-based lifestyle. And Dr. Baxter Montgomery, founder and medical director of Montgomery Health and Wellness Center. So they have some heavy hitters out there. It's free, guys. Come on out and support that, because we have to invest in our health. That's priceless. You can acquire all the goods and services that you want, but if you don't have your health, you don't have nothing. So come on out and support Vale Scott's free health summit today. Like I said, that's at 10 to 6 p.m. Cleveland Clinic, South Point, right there on Harvard. Brother V, what's going on?
Well, as you said, we have a great show lined up for you, and we have one of our legendary scholars, film producers, directors. He's done 3 films. He's not just a film director. He has initiated a movement, and he is going to be going back to the motherland in February. So we want to let everybody know about what's going on with this. So it gives me a great deal of pleasure to introduce to you our good and dear friend and brother Taaqiy Grant. Brother Taaqiy, how are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you brothers doing?
Doing
Doing
good, brother.
great.
Doing good.
Glad to be back. It's been some time. It's good to be back on 360 Network, Info Network.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Well,
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
I see you got the professional hookup. You probably have that Shure M7 microphone in front of you. You know.
That's exactly what it is.
Okay, all right. That's kind of a broadcast standard, man. Good to see that you're keeping up with things, and glad to see that you are producing content. I know on select weekdays, you and Felicia Harden do a broadcast, and I was just privileged to witness one that you did last week that featured the brother who I believe was a president of a Black-owned bank in Detroit, and then you had Dr. Julianne Malveaux on, and you were talking about some very important things for us to understand. So we're going to talk a little bit about the Fed. We're going to talk about CBDCs. We're going to talk about Blackonomics. I think that was a coin that our dear friend Claude Anderson may have coined. But the HAPI movement is all about Black economics, African economics, and you have your finger on the pulse of what's going on here and on the other side of the world. So we definitely want to have you comment about that. Also, you had an event, I believe it was last March, and you brought in some heavy hitters. So I want to go back to that, talk to you a little bit about what happened in Kemet when the folks decided that they wanted to turn Kevin Hart around because he was pulling the sheets off and all that good stuff. So really looking forward to this conversation. We're going to take a break at around 11:15. and then another break at 45. So we'll get into the conversation, and once again, welcome you to 360 Info Network. First of all, let's just jump right into it. You guys are going to Kemet in February. Tell us what that is all about.
Oh man, for me, that's what I like to call connecting the dots. We've been doing these trips. I hate to call them trips because they're not trips. When you make a any type of journey to the motherland, it's more of a pilgrimage, almost a rites of passage for us as African people. So this experience we're going to have in February is what I like to call connecting the dots, making it real. When we think about us just knowing our history, the question is, you know who you are now. What the hell are you going to do about it? And that's essentially what February is for us, or the Happy 2024 tour to Kemet or Egypt is for us. And when we say what the hell are you going to do about it, or connecting the dots, it's tying in our economics, or the understanding of our economics, to our history, or as Dr. J and others have put it, tying in the economics, politics, and culture, just making it real. We have the historical part. We have that down pack. A lot of times when you think of those three categories, economics, politics, and culture, you think of, I see culture as what I like to call the low hanging fruit. And I think a lot of times we kind of reach for that because it's so easily obtainable for us. It's like right there, we can adorn certain dress, we could wear, we can unks and read books and dashikis, and just different things. We can do those things relatively easy. But when it comes to particularly people with African consciousness obtaining the other two aspects or categories, those things seem to be kind of further away from us. Dr. Malvo, you mentioned her a second ago. She said in Hapi, Black people oftentimes see economics like kids looking in a window at candy through a window, looking at candy through the window of a candy store. It's there, but it's distance from us. We do the small microeconomics of paying our bills, things like that. But the more macroeconomics is kind of distance from us. What this excursion is giving us is the understanding that we've always been economic actors. We were the ones who started economics. So when we say discover the origins of economics in Egypt with Hapi, we're essentially going to show you how we were the first people to develop an economic system. It's what I like to call the plan before the plan, right? When I say the plan before the plan, is understanding that building the pyramids took a tremendous plan, surveying, drawing sketches and maps and all those various different aspects of architecture. But there was a plan that was put in place that people oftentimes don't mention, and that is the economic plan. Before they developed anything, before they moved the first block, the first stone, before they cut anything, they had to develop an economic plan that was just going to sustain the workforce over periods of several decades. That's amazing when you really put that in context, what that looked like in terms of just the management system. And these are things that we must understand before we try to develop any institution in our community. Our economic plan has to go first. So that's one aspect, just looking at the ancient aspects of economics. This journey will also tie in that with more contemporary or just I'm gonna say future, but more contemporary thought process of economics. We're going to have several economists there along with the historians. So the economic workshops will be going hand in hand with the lectures on the Kemetic philosophy or Kemetic history. So it's a very empowering journey, and I'm looking forward to it. Like I said, I've been doing almost 3 decades, and this first time I can say I'm really like super excited about something, because we oftentimes talk the talk, but it's now time for us to walk the walk.
So you mentioned that there are going to be lectures. Obviously, this is going to be an informative type of excursion, but at the same time, you're going to go to most of the major places that you go to when you go to Kemet. Can you talk a little bit about some of the destinations that are involved?
Oh, absolutely. So, you can't, well, in my opinion, you can't visit Egypt without going to the Great Pyramids. right? You got to see that. So one of the things in for Arcade Tours, which is the company we started almost 25 years ago, we do in all our trips is we do something I like to call the evolution of pyramid building, right? So with that, we kind of started the earliest phase of pyramid construction and then take you through the various different adaptations of pyramids before it got to the perfect right angle structure, which you see in Giza. So when you go to Saqqara, you'll see what they call mastabas. You see step pyramids. You go to Dashur, you see what's called the bent pyramid. Then the red brick pyramid, which is the first right angle pyramid. Then Giza is kind of follows that. So we kind of follow that line. So people can actually see that this was almost a trial and error process that they were trying to achieve certain things and they finally got to their ultimate goal. So when you understand that, there's a process of things in life, and it debunks any notion of extraterrestrials being involved in a serious way. It kind of dispels any of those myths, and it gets to the fact that Africans really were the ones at the forefront of developing these systems. You got to go to the great temples in Luxor, the temple of Karnak, Luxor Temple. You visit also on your Luxor, you visit the West Bank, um, the Valley of the Kings, Queen Hatshepsut's mortuary temple, and so forth. Down in Aswan, the Temple of Philae, and we'll also be going to Abu Simbel. Now, this is the Hapi tour. So the Hapi tour, we do things kind of exclusive to what we call Hapi, meaning that there are certain ancestors or certain places we visit that are very essential to what we are doing, particularly that of Harkuf. Harkuf, I like to call him the resident ancestor of Hapi because his understanding, he was the governor during the time of Pepi II, and he was responsible for mapping out trade expeditions to Kerma or Yam or to Nubia, if you will, or certain parts of Nubia. And his story became so pivotal in what we're doing in terms of understanding. He was a governor, but he was also like this huge economist, this trade expert. And his story kind of ties in the relationships between these two African nations during that period. So that's an essential part of the excursion for us because we got to understand that again we was always economic actors, and Harkuf would be definitely in a model of that and an example of how Africans have always been dealing with economics. Also, this must be mentioned, and we have to underscore this, is that we have a chartered cruise exclusively for our group. Now, this is the important part because most of the times you go to Egypt, you have to share. If you're on a Nile cruise, you'll share your boat or the cruise ship with various other groups. This one is exclusively for our group and is on the ship that we'll be able to cultivate and curate our experience in terms, especially with the economic experience. We're going to have a lot of entertainment there. There's certain performers that are coming over from the States that's going to perform on the ship for us. We'll be have our workshops and so forth. So this is going to be not just any other type of trip to Egypt. Definitely not going to be like that. And lastly, the trip will culminate with the Happy Dinner Gala. So bring your best dress, come dressed to impress, and have a good time.
Okay, it sounds like it is going to be a good time, and I really do have to give some serious consideration, get my ducats together so I can make that voyage with you. I want to talk to you about the difference between the people of Kemet and us now and how they were able to accomplish what they were able to accomplish. We'll also talk about some of the folks that you are going to be bringing in to be a part of this great mission. And we're going to talk about economics when we return. You're listening to 360 Info Network right here on AM 1490 WERE. Our guest is Taaqiy Grant. He is the executive producer and director of Hapi Film, and he's also at the helm of a great movement that we are excited to talk to you about. We will be right back after this word from our sponsor. So we got about 50 seconds. How you feeling, bro?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. Yeah. How you doing, Antonio? Been a long time.
Yeah, my brother, I'm doing pretty good, man. Hanging, just sitting here, going through the whole motions with this job and seeing what's my next move in it, and I'm retiring soon, so I'm just trying to get some duckies in the row, bro.
I could dig it. We were planning to do something in the Midwest, in Chicago, and looks like we're gonna have to wait to maybe after Egypt to do this. But the Midwest has definitely been, a place we've been talking about, and definitely while we're there, kind of coming down.
15 seconds.
Okay, all right, brother. Let me know.
We'll save that.
Okay,
we're hot. All right, we're back. 360 Info Network with our guest Taaqiy Grant of Hapi Films. They're going to be going to Kemet, or Egypt as we know it now, and it's going to take place from the 16th of February through the 25th of February. A lot of great things in store. Brother Taaqiy, could you tell us about who some of the players are going to be in this great mission?
So we're going to have Dishi Chihutimes will be with us, Dr. Gina Falou, Brother Jamal Milton. He's one of the conscious hip-hop stars, artists. He'll also be on the ship performing with us, and we're actually adding to the lineup. I don't want to mention certain names, but we know until we get the confirmation, but we'll have some announcements coming up soon.
Okay. And if folks are interested in keeping up to date, where can they go?
Well, to register for the trip, then go to akhettours.com, AKHETTOURS.com. Register for the trip. Registration fee is only $300. Just make sure you have your passport ready when you go onto the website. The register is going to be a fantastic experience. Again, it's not a trip. This is the Hapi 2024 tour to Egypt. Discover the origins of economics of Egypt with Hapi. It's going to be an amazing experience. Just in terms of the historical, the luxury accommodations, the information on economics, and just having a really, really good time. So it's going to be a full, comprehensive experience. When we do these types of journeys, we don't like to leave any stone left unturned. So just, go to akhettours.com and register now.
All right. Well, a few years back, I was privileged to make that journey with Dr. Runoko Rashidi. May peace and blessings be upon him. His transition was marked just this past week. I think it was the 2nd of August. So I really appreciated what he brought in terms of understanding what we were looking at. And there were places where we went where there was security, there were guards, and they didn't appreciate him telling the truth. So, the fact that you've got this cruise ship and it's going to be just you, just us, I'm going to put it in those terms. It's going to be just us. That's a great thing. And I'm sure based on your experience, having gone there several times, you will definitely be in a position to dispense the knowledge and the wisdom. I want to talk to you about the Hapi Film and the Nile Valley phenomenon. Back then, it's my understanding that the people had a greater awareness of their purpose and their connection with nature, and as a result of that, they were able to accomplish things that can't be explained now. I'm mindful of the 42 declarations of freedom from sin that were a part of their daily rituals. Can you talk about the mindset, the spirituality that was evident at that time and compare it to where we are now?
Well, one of the things I like to first thing that comes to mind when I think of then and now is distractions. There's so many different things that distract us from who we are. When I say who we really are in terms of the God self. And one of the things that, the thing at the top of that list is we're constantly in survival mode. When I remember reading years ago, Stolen Legacy, one of the things that kind of stuck out in that book was the argument George James was making about the Greeks could not have possibly been the fathers or the authors of this knowledge because they were constantly in a state of survival mode, either through environmental issues that they were having or just the constant wars. whereas the Kemet to you were essentially in a Garden of Eden, where survival was not something they were doing. So creativity was something that flowed, you know. In fact, when they were building the great edifices, a lot of times those took place during the annual flood of the Nile or the Hapi River. So when the Nile flooded, you know, you got to also keep in mind that the people there, by and large, were farmers. They lived in an agrarian society. So when the floodwaters were present, there was no farming taking place. And there's a lot of times where you get your workforce from, and the skilled laborers would kind of go to whatever project they were working on. And at that time, they would collectively do these different, uh,
Task is good.
major tasks,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So when you understand that you live in a society where people are not worried about their bellies, they're not worried about, you know, the essential aspects of economics, shelter, safety, and clothing. They're not worried about those types of things. Their minds are more free to just, you know, chart the stars and try to figure out complex systems of understanding, you know, human nature or just nature in general. And that's what we were able to do very successfully. We were able to utilize what the creator or the divine principles gave us in the sense of just our natural ecosystem, and take that ecosystem and develop it into this massive civilization that we had. Another thing that's really important is what Dr. Jeffries like what he calls the three C's: communal, cooperative, and collective spiritual development. Now, they were able to work together in a communal, you know, sense, collectively, you know, and cooperatively. And that's something that we're missing today. And when we understand, we talk about Hapi, the principle of Hapi itself, what it represents, what it symbolizes is unity. And when you look at most of the seated statues of the Masut or the pharaohs in Kemet, and they're always seated on the foundation. The foundation is Hapi. It's, oh, that's the river. It's this, it's that. But when you look at it, you see the Hapi of the north and the Hapi of the south tying the lotus and papyrus plants together in a knot. And that tying of knot together, it's a knot of unity. And that knot of unity is symbolic of just keeping things together. And if it wasn't that, that was the foundation. And if it's not for that foundation, it would be no Kemet or Egypt as we know it.
Right.
And that principle was almost like the it's like putting the cornerstone in when you're building any building. They had to have that principle of unity before they built anything. So you had the unity principle, you
Mm-hmm.
know, which is again the three C's as Dr. J calls it. Um, then you also had the understanding of just the whole ecosystem of where they were, and just in terms of their spirituality, be able to develop spirituality for not being in survival mode. Here today, particularly African Americans, we're distracted. We're constantly distracted with being just surviving. We're running around every day, working 9 to 5s, 30, 40 years. You don't have time to do other things. Your mind is not resting, or your mind is not in a space where it could just create, because you got to think about the next day. And as long as they keep us distracted, it's going to be really difficult for us to do the things that we did in the past.
That's
Agree.
a really
Agree.
interesting observation, and one of the things that I think about is the fact that when you talk about going inside, going internal, when you look at some of those ancient artifacts, you'll see that our ancestors were engaged in meditation. I can remember going to Beni Hassan, and one of the chambers there was actually like a stool or like a throne or something, and I was so tempted that I gave in to temptation and I sat on it and I assumed the position. But the fact is that because they were so focused and because they participated in that on a regular basis, they weren't as distracted as we are today. I mean, they didn't have television back then, so they were much more in tune with themselves. So I guess the challenge for us now, in light of the fact that many of us don't even relate to an African past. We're so disconnected from that. And then on top of that, we have all of these distractions. How do we reach folk who seem to be unreachable?
Well, and it's interesting. I like that question because that question kind of brings us back to the theme of February. And we know who we are now. What the hell are we going to do about it, right? And when you start to think about the getting out of survival mode, getting out of just doing the microeconomics and looking at and building the plan before the plan, those are things that puts us in position to be able to just essentially relax our brains, right? When you think about just us coming together and colluding with each other enough, a lot of times too, this kind of ties into that. When you think about our institutions and the failures and successes of Black organizations, a lot of times one of the things that kind of drives either the success or the failure is the economic plan, right? You look at the Nation of Islam almost been in existence going almost about 100 years now. And when you look at the Nation of Islam, one of the things that, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad put in place was the economic plan. And it sustained them for, almost a century. And when you think about that and versus some of the other organizations where they may have failed at, was that plan before the plan. So, which also tied them together, because when people are not fighting about the essential elements of their safety or their livelihoods, they can come together and do other things. And that's the really, really fundamental thing. And I think a lot of times we make this a lot more complicated than it is. I think the solution is very simple. Sometimes getting to the solution may be difficult, but I think the solution really is trying to figure out a way how people can kind of like don't have to worry about those types of things, because now they can do other things and kind of come together and just build.
Okay.
Mhm. Mhm.
Brother Antonio, I know you're sitting there and your
Mhm.
mind is racing. There are things going through your brain, and I know you want to get something off your chest. So I want to have you jump in if you could.
Yeah, point well taken on a lot of points that you talked about, us being in survival mode, and that is the whole, I guess, purpose, to keep us pitting against each other, keep us busy, thinking about day to day stuff. So you never get a chance to
And keep us
to
killing each
dig that,
other.
yeah, and keeps killing each other. To dig deep within yourself and find yourself, because over the temples to say know who you are. But one
Hmm.
thing we have to, and something I was just reading too in Chancellor Williams' book, and also Brother Sekou and Brother Anxis is actually got a debate coming up in September, and me and Brother Sekou was talking about the debate is about spirituality and science. Okay, which one is best for the Black community? So Sekou's taking definitely the spirituality piece and basically saying, and which I agree in what Chancellor Williams talked about, and I think you too, Brother Taaqiy, would agree about. Before we can even get those structures and the economic piece together, there got to be some spiritual, cultural unity going on, or at least some understanding of working towards the right direction. I think that's some of the plan before the plan as well. I think that's where we missed the boat, and I think culture is one of the common culture, common worldview is one of the keys, and putting that cornerstone or that foundational piece together to where we can work together, and because it's all purposeful, and culture in itself is it's an indoctrination used to get the community and people together working on a cause that is the greater good for the greater number. So I think all those some of those prerequisites is necessary to get this building and economic, and it's something that I've said before, and I think you're hitting right on it and saying, okay, we read enough books. Okay, we know the deception and the things that have taken place. Uh, to get us there, because it's always going to be a few who make the decision for the many. So everybody is not going to get it on board, come on board with it. But the folks who claim to know and is out there doing something. Now we got to put some tangible together for the people to follow. And I think that's what you're trying to do too with Hapi. Put this economic piece together. So it's like the boys in the street, they like, okay, what I'm gonna do? You telling me to stop saying drugs, but how I'm gonna take care of myself? Show me a plan that I can do to take care of myself. And that's what, when you talk to some of the gang bangers on the street, they're like, how I'm gonna feed my family. So the economic plan is very important.
No, it is, and so is culture, and so is the politics. When I look at the culture, just kind of to go back to the things that was said earlier, was for us, it seems like culture is easy. It's very easily obtainable. We can come together. We can gather. Brother Vince mentioned earlier in the show about the event we had earlier this year in February when we had the Happy Day of Black Excellence. Bringing the folks together, that's relatively easy. People like to, we like the fellowship. It's in our nature, it's in our blood. Those are things that are very easy for us. People with like minds like to come together. We have folks come from all over the world to be a part of that experience, and that is something that I see that we like to do. There's a festival, there's something going on. There's a drum ceremony. We do those things. We come together. We can do the culture. Some do it more than others, but we do that. And when I look at, again, the cultural piece, I see it as a low-hanging fruit. So we know we have that. I'm not saying we have that down to a really, really good science, but I think we have a handle on that. Now, when you talk about, just again, and I'm thinking from an organizational standpoint, Black organizations that are culturally based, failures and successes, their failure to me is not necessarily the culture, because they have that part. That's their foundational piece. But people, because what you need, and this is really interesting, when I really started like put some thought into this, is to sustain these organizations, you need workers. You need a serious workforce. You need people that are committed to doing it every day. That's really hard when people are not getting compensated.
Yeah, there's some worker bees, huh?
Right. If you cannot compensate the people at the core, you're gonna have at some point it's going to fail. At some point it's going to be challenging, and it's not going to be able to sustain itself for a long period of time. People will volunteer, right? A lot of organizations work on volunteer base, a model that's not going to sustain you over a long period of time. It's just not. People will come, they'll do some stuff, they'll work, then they'll have other commitments or obligations that's going to pay their bills, that's going to come before it. So when you figure out a model how to sustain that, then you can sustain your organizations, your institutions, and that's where we're missing. And that's going to get us to the next stage, is when we really start to put that in play. Like, how do we have that put in place? And I mean, it could be something simple as janitorial commitments, and people are not going to volunteer to clean bathrooms and things like that. They'll do it, but when you're paying them now, it's just a whole different type of mindset. And they may do it. I'm sorry, brother, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to throw in real quick. And when you start talking about economics and stuff like that, I just, and I don't want to veer too far off your subject matter though, but something I just seen with PLO that was talking about giving praise to Julius Malema in South Africa with the EFF, the economic freedom fighters. And what's your thoughts on that, real quick? I just wanted to touch on that before I lose you. Economic, and it's almost seemed like because he's Africa for Africans type of philosophy, but he's twisting the government's arms and turning over some of those finances, and that's something Dr. Amos Wilson talking. If you ain't all this equal playing field with Islam and all the rest of them, if y'all ain't sharing that dollars around and spreading around, ain't nothing equal and fair about that. If you're not doing that, and I think that's an organization that Black folks in the diaspora should be thinking about. Economic freedom fighters, they taking it back.
Yeah, you know what? I told me I really actually need to do some research on that. I got to look into that a little further before I really comment on it. But anything that's is working towards a distribution of wealth, I think is the important thing. Is we need to, and it's interesting because we have, in to your point with culture, we have black billionaires. Estimated $1.4 trillion of spending power. Black America be the 12th richest nation if we aggregated our wealth, so forth, so on, right?
Mm-hmm.
And people debate on that number, and that's fine. But the reality is that we have wealth within our community, right? But the more, and here's where culture becomes for those that have wealth, the money, they seems like they're missing the cultural piece,
Yes.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So if we had those versus other communities, like those people in the Jewish communities, other communities, they have an understanding that they have a responsibility to their people.
Yes.
So because they had that cultural paradigm that black wealthy Americans by and large are missing. I'm not saying all, but just by and large, we don't put race first or culture first, before your before their dollars. Um, so you're absolutely right. When you're looking at it from that perspective, we those people have to have the cultural piece. And when you start to think about that, then you think about a better distribution of wealth. Brother Umar Johnson, it's funny. I was just looking at one of his a reel the other day, and he was comparing black billionaires and millionaires to whites, and he was like, the difference is they employ almost 10,000 of their people. The blacks don't, and that kind of struck home. And they do it intentionally. You know, they understand the importance of creating job spaces in certain communities, so that it can help thrive communities. When you look at the black community, and just over the past 50, 60 years, some of the things that were intentionally done is when blacks begin to migrate into certain type of cities, manufacturing or certain jobs would leave, and sometimes we came there because those jobs were, or those plants or what have you were there. So we migrated, to Detroit and New York and other places like that. And then these companies would leave just intentionally not to employ black people, and they would move to kind of predominantly white neighborhoods. And again, they would give opportunities, economic opportunities to whites. And you kind of copy and you add that on to the political strategies that were used, like the redlining and the federal government getting involved, not providing black people with the upper mobility of home ownership. So these things were so done intentionally. So we have to be intentional as well, is what I'm saying. Is like the black people who have those type of opportunities have to be intentional, and in providing opportunities and spaces for black people to thrive, because everything was done intentionally against us. Now we have to do things intentionally for us.
I'm glad that you brought up that point, because what we're witnessing right now is a massive transfer of wealth. And when you talk about wealth, you talk about how finances have been used as a system of control. So those of us who are locked into this system of wages are really locked into a system of slavery. We, as you pointed out, have over $1 trillion passing through our hands in a given year, but we don't use those dollars effectively. We don't circulate them in our own communities. We don't employ each other to the extent that we should. And while we have this conversation, you have entities like the World Economic Forum and other groups that are looking at ways to increase the amount of control over the system. Just a couple weeks ago, a new payment system was instituted in the United States called FedNow, and many are seeing it as a precursor to central bank digital currencies. Most people are completely unaware of what central bank digital currencies are, but one of the dangers of CBDCs is that they are programmable and they're trackable, and they will have expiration dates. This is one of the ways that they will spur stimulation of the economy. People, because they have money that is not going to be money in a certain period of time, they're going to be challenged to go ahead and spend that money. But that being said, they won't be able to save it. They will also be able to told what they can buy, what they can't buy. They want to implement a new credit system, a social credit system, where they monitor your movements, they monitor your purchases. They're really, really trying to get control of the entire planet. As I said, I did watch the broadcast that Felicia participated in last week, and I was really intrigued by the idea that we don't fully understand what's going on in our banking system right now. And when you talk about South Africa and economic freedom fighters, these are folks who realize that the United States have been bullies over a long period of time with currency. But what happened with this Ukrainian war, when they froze all of those assets, countries around the world decided that, hey, we don't want to be bullied anymore with the US dollar. So that's what we call de-dollarization. I'm just curious from you, Taaqiy, if you are aware of these changes that are taking place in the economic system and how we will weather the storm, so to speak.
You know, it's interesting because when I first thought of doing that show, I did it from a fact-checking kind of standpoint. One of the things that concerns me is there's so much information out there, and we don't know what's real and what's not. And I'm gonna start with Fed Now. Months ago, when I was first hearing, or when we were first hearing about Fed Now, one of the things that it was a lot of the videos, particularly the podcasts and just stuff that was on social media, was saying that it would replace financial apparatuses like Cash App, Venmo, PayPal, things like that. Those companies would no longer exist, and Fed Now would be the only means for us to transact or to make transactions between one another. And obviously, for a lot of people, that was concerning. And July 7th was supposed to be the date that it was supposed to happen. Now, one of the things that Kim Kelly, who he's still the president of First Independence Bank, and he's also the national chairman or the chairman for the Black Bankers Association. Wanted to bring him on from a banking standpoint, just to kind of just elaborate on what it is, what is the system. And one of the things that they were saying that essentially was a communication between banks just to resolve, validate checks in a much more rapid pace.
Right.
Again, I'm not really sure exactly of all the tenets of it, but it's definitely something we need to keep our eyes on. Another thing that kind of wanted me to do the show was the de-dollarization. Listen, let's make no mistake about it. You know, we're Americans, and since that we live here, and if something happens to the dollar, it's going to impact us. Let's not be, you know, so confused about that. That's a real thing. So we wanted to kind of talk about that and see what a dollar, you know, was in terms of other nations. And, you know, I think BRICS, you know, I think the brother you're referring to, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, trying to create a currency that would rival the dollar in a sense that the dollar would no longer be the international currency. And they've been trying to do this for some time, prior to, you know, the war in Ukraine and, you know, America putting sanctions on it. But there are some fears, like you said, from a lot of countries that they could essentially be annihilated economically if they don't bow to the wills of the United States. But one thing I'm gonna say about America and its influence, you know, America has a military influence, which is very well known. But I think one of the things that really, really makes America powerful is Americana. Americana is something that people willingly or unwillingly kind of accept. And no matter where you go in the world, you're going to see an aspect of American culture. American culture is so pervasive and so powerful. You think of things like Coca-Cola, McDonald's, Apple. These are the things that makes America powerful. And no matter what they're doing in terms of trying to remove themselves out of the American economic system, as long as they are in love with American culture, they will always bow to America. No matter if there's one missile being fired, the Americana is the real strength of the American dollar. And as long as that is going, I don't really see the dollar really having much rivals.
Well, one of the reasons that it won't have many rivals is because of the bond markets. So some of these other countries that are proposing that their currency, for instance, China's currency, be used as a world reserve trading currency, it's not even practical to entertain that idea because the infrastructure isn't there. So the way I see it, some of it is hype, but actually some of it is reality. So the US being not being the world reserve trading currency is not something that's going to happen overnight. But at the same time, when you have these BRICS countries come together and say, well, we want to create another currency and have it backed by a commodity, that's a game changer. They're expected to make an announcement at the summit that they have in South Africa this month, but it's not going to be backed by gold. It's going to be linked to gold, and it's going to be linked in such a way that the weight of gold is important, but not necessarily the value. Those who are into acquiring gold, they're going to benefit tremendously. So, I'm not a financial advisor. I can't give you financial advice. This is education, information, and entertainment only. But it would behoove you to acquire gold, especially if you want to have an alternative to a CBDC, which is going to be such a tremendous weapon of control of populations. I had a conversation with Wayne Chandler the other day, and it was about credit cards. And so we have these credit cards, we have those third-party vendors that you mentioned, but we also have this effort to digitally identify everybody on the planet. And the sophistication of it is that we will move from the swipe of a credit card to scanning your iris or your thumbprint. They were having conversations about putting a chip in your hand, and they're already doing that in some countries, but they're going to get to such a level of sophistication if they have their way. And I say if they have their way because nothing is etched in stone. We have all these dystopian views about what they want to do, but then what they want to do isn't always practical. I mean, just like this idea that by the year 2030, no one will own a car. All of the vehicles will be electric powered vehicles and there won't be any gas powered vehicles. Well, bruh, I believe that when it happens. I just don't know that it's necessarily practical to do that, but we entertain these grandiose ideas that they push on us, and then we live in that lower vibrational state that you mentioned because everybody is so hung up on survival that they don't think rationally about what we can do to operate outside of that system. But the reality is that we were the ones who created economics, as you have pointed out. And I think that given the resources that we have on the continent of Africa and our imprint on the entire globe, we're not just going to sit down and let them roll over us and have their way. There is going to come a time when we return to the greatness that we have known as people on this planet. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned the continent. I'm kind of watching some of the things that's kind of going on in the continent. It's like, goddamn, history is repeating itself all over again with this kind of the Cold War playing out on the African continent. And you're seeing a lot of these countries kind of going from one puppet master to the next. And, in order for us to really, really have real power and control, we have to really be more so we have to manage our resources. And, Africa has tremendous resources. We're well aware of this. But these African countries seem to be kind of choosing sides in this world battle. Either China, Russia, the U.S., and all three of these countries are kind of like just going to the continent and kind of carving it up again. It's like almost going back to the Belgian conference all over again. And it's really interesting to kind of see this play out. And I think as long as we kind of stay in that paradigm, we're going to stay where we are. We kind of have to let them kind of fight their thing out and kind of stay out of their fight. And it's very difficult to do that because the tentacles are so deeply inside the continent. But I think, when we think of liberation, we have to liberate ourselves again from those cultural paradigms that control us. The Chinese have embedded themselves so deep in Africa that a lot of African countries owes China a tremendous debt, and because of this debt, like United States has them indebted. In some senses, Russia has them indebted. They kind of make concessions that they normally would not make, and we gotta stop falling for the hokey doke. We have to see the play in the playbook that they've played already, and we come up to court, pass one, pass two, not like that. That can't work anymore. We have to kind of reassess our defense so that they don't be able to run that same play, and that seems to be for me one of the things it's consistently happening. Same plays are being ran, and we keep doing the same things all over. How many times you can keep hearing about a coup? And the coup that's based on this war in Sudan is similar to what's going on in Niger. And this thing, I'm like, God damn, we're playing the 60s all over again. So when you start thinking about that, it's not a laughing matter, but it also gets to show you where we really are. And let's be honest and clear about where we really are. And until we can again say, you know what, we've seen this already, let's do something else, things are not going to change.
Let me interject something real quick there. You may see that circle going around again, because I was waiting to see, and I got my eyes on the continent about what these people, these powers are going to do to break up any kind of movement that is going on in Africa. If you see something, the PLOs of the world and the Julius Malanas of the world, and our sister Ariana, all those people are talking and trying to sound the wake up call, and they talk about United States of Africa and the visa situation that they're trying to put together. I was talking to my brother. I'm just waiting to see what are they going to do to disrupt all of that, and our people should not be discouraged when they see little flare-ups going on in Africa, because this is what they're going to do. And this is what when you say history, this is what they're going to do to disrupt any kind of movement. Because you think France is going to sit back and let them take their rental property, because Africa is nothing but rental property to Europe. So you think they're going to sit back there and let those folks get their mindset together without them throwing some sugar in the game, some stuff in the game. So we need to sit back and look and see what they're going to do, because they're going to do something. They coming at them.
Right, and it's almost like the Tower of Babel effect when you think about it. People are coming together,
Yes.
and you make them confused and confounded, and they're constantly fighting each other. And by and large, because of that, they'll be in survival mode. They'll never be able to really kind of move forward. And you see some like countries, very progressive countries, and countries that have tremendous resources. One of the reasons why Sudan had it split, Sudan once upon a time was the largest country in Africa. Now you have the South Sudan and the Sudan, and they had that long 20-year war between the North and the South years ago, and it was a war over resources. And now they still can't get their act together, even with this new formation in these new countries. It's amazing when you think about that, and when you think about just these wars in general. The war with United States and China, even though they haven't started fighting, there's a war over, it's an economic war. That's what they're really fighting about, economic power. The South China Sea, I can't think of the number right now, but it's estimated, I guess, $50 billion or $1 trillion of trade kind of comes through that strait, and China's trying to put a stranglehold in that region. There's a lot of other countries that send their ships through there, and the United States has a huge presence there to protect economics, or just to make sure they protect their economic interests. So when you think about this war in Ukraine, you think about the Strait of Hormuz in Iran, with Iran, all these different so-called hotspots in the world where things can really flare up, or are flaring up, or will potentially flare up because it's economic. People are fighting for economics. So no matter which way we turn and get into this, it kind of brings us back to the beginning of this discussion about the foundation of civilization, and even going back to ancient times, the war against the Hyksos and others in ancient Kemet, and certain wars between, Egypt and its neighbors. A lot of times, by and large, they were wars for trade routes, and people were fighting for trade routes 5,000-6,000 years ago, and they'll still be fighting for trade routes today. And that's what this is. China's talking about building a Silk Road, and Russia's talking about planning a building of a canal, and all these different things again is to put them or themselves or BRICS. Again, I don't know how we get away from the economic discussion, and where we lose as Black folks, we're not having those macroeconomic discussions. We're not competing on a global stage. We're competing on a very, very small stage, a very small micro stage. These folks are competing on a global stage. They're competing for global dominance of economics. And as long as they can keep the continent confused and confounded and
Yes.
fighting each other and coups and all that, they will control the resources. To your point, France is not going to just let Africa go. France wants to have a hold in African resources. So does the United States, so does Russia, so does China, and so forth. But we can name a host of other countries that are still involved in Africa in pillaging African resources. So that's what it's about, and that's what it's always been about. Even talking about this whole thing with Cleopatra, that went on for some time, and the brother brought up Kevin Hart some time ago, and we were talking about that whole thing with him in Egypt, and Cleopatra kind of had a flare up as well. The whole introduction of Rome into Egypt was Rome to garner Egypt's resources to supply its, to be able to feed its empire.
His armies.
So when that was the allure for Rome, was Egypt's economic wealth. They wanted that because it would help sustain them, because they know that was a part of their economic plan. See, again, we talked about this, earlier, the plan before the plan. Everybody's thinking about an economic plan before the plan, except Black folks.
All right. Well, with that, we're going to have to wind things down, but I want to invite you to stick with us, Brother Taaqiy, because we can continue this broadcast on Facebook and YouTube after we close out the show, if you're able to stay with us for a few more moments. Normally, at this point in the show, we'll talk about a few announcements, and we want to remind folks that they can go to that wellness summit at South Point Hospital, Milton Mills, and a bunch of other luminaries in the field of natural health are going to be there. And so you can be a part of that. It's going to go at least until 4 or 5 o'clock. I think it started at 10 o'clock. So we
6 to 10.
6 to 10. So
I'm sorry.
last night. Yeah. So again, you can go by the hospital and take part in that. And we also would like to thank our viewers and our listeners who are watching us on YouTube and Facebook and listening on newstalkcleveland.com. We thank our engineer, Tone, for making this broadcast possible. And as always, know yourself, love yourself, be yourself, and make today your absolute best day. We got about 40 seconds.
So like my brother Antonio might have froze there. So yeah, just tell everybody, make sure they go to iCareTours.com and register for the Happy 2024 tour to Egypt. Discover the origins of economics in Egypt with Happy. And the point is that economics is something very important for us from a foundational standpoint. Economics is the foundation of civilization. When you think of economics in the sense of just understanding your ecosystem, nature, and the reason why the ancient Kemetic, the ancient Egyptians, were so economically wealthy, because they were really avid studiers of just their ecology. And that ecology, they were able to take that ecology and turn that into the economy. And that's the message for us. How do we turn our ecology into our economy? What are our resources here in our community today? And the question you asked earlier ties that in terms of then and now. What are some of the differences? And that is something I'll add to that as well. It's just mastering our ecology. And we to now we failed to do that. We're not mastering our ecology in a way effective enough to empower ourselves.
Yeah. We didn't really get into a deep discussion about where banks are right now, but because of the controls that are in place right now, a lot of these banks, particularly the smaller banks, are being forced out of business and are being acquired by the larger banks. And it seems like there could be some kind of a plan to centralize the banks in America and again, have this transfer of wealth. when we look at the smaller banks are the ones that are embedded in communities. They have relationships with the folks who do the banking with them. But the problem is with the smaller banks, they don't have the capital that the larger banks have. So when they look at their balance sheets, they're compromised. And then you also have entities that aren't really monitoring the banks to the extent that they should. So they're not engaged in good banking. You know, you've got deposits and then you've got equities, and the imbalance in that is what's causing some of those banks to go under and be acquired by the other banks. I'm thinking historically about Mansa Musa and how he was the wealthiest African and the wealthiest person on the planet, and looking at where we are right now and how that paradigm shift has occurred. So now, as a general rule, we don't save our money, or well, if we do save our money, we don't invest it. So our money is not working for us, we're working for our money, and we're trapped in that whole paradigm of survival so that we get the job and we pay the bills, but we never get ahead. I think it was a great thing that Brother Ken brought to us in terms of the legacy building and creating that trust so that, you know, our wealth could be passed down to generation from generation to generation. But it really is a mindset that we have to change so that we liberate ourselves from being economic slaves and get to a point where we can create wealth that we pass down a generation, and it comes as a result of literacy and awareness. So that's one of the reasons that I see why Hapi Film is so important. The movement is so important because it wakes people up to the necessity for them to have that connection with economics on a macro scale, as you mentioned, as opposed to the micro scale. So just curious about how you see what's unfolding in the world of banking, and how we can exist in a sustainable way within that infrastructure.
Wow. You know, one of the things that we need to do is kind of go back to the things Ken Kelly pointed out, and he kind of laid it out in the film as well. He talked about it very eloquently in the Happy Film in terms of, you know, almost a plan for yourself. Again, going back to this plan, you know, we talk about the more larger plan, but there has to be an individual kind of plan. And, you know, talked about simple things like managing your credit. And, you know, once you do that, you know, purchasing your home, and protection, you know, was a big thing, do insurance. And then once you have that, those things being protected, you know, now you're talking about the trajectory of wealth and passing wealth down to your family, and also the education and the knowledge of this teaching into your children. I think for us, you know, starting off very simply as, you know, having communities that have this understanding and kind of moving forward. And it's almost sad as Black folks that we have to have these type of conversations, because, you know, everyone is really kind of almost natural to them. And once we kind of have this type of wealth, now we can talk about aggregating our wealth and creating our own banking system. Credit unions is something that sustained the Black community for a very long time. We've had our own systems of banking. We were able to kind of do these things to kind of move forward, particularly when white institutions didn't want to give us loans. You know, our Black Wall Streets were by and large kind of sustained through a Black banking system. So these are things we've always kind of done. We know we've had to kind of play almost outside of the system because the system was never meant to assist us. And when we get back to that motto, understanding, just kind of working on each other, we don't need anything outside of ourselves. Everything we seem to do, we can do it ourselves. One of the things is, you know, when we think about Black wealth has been kind of tricked into thinking that it's not successful unless it looks like white wealth, you know. And you think about Black industries that we created, that we've integrated or we sold because, you know, we felt that in order for us to really succeed, rather, you know, you guys there in the Midwest, Negro Leagues was big there, other forms of Black entertainment, rather, you know, music and otherwise, you know, there's a reason why soul music doesn't exist anymore. Black Black people are not making music for Black people anymore, which is really, really interesting. Black people are making music now, or just pop music. No such thing as soul music anymore. And these are things that have also adverse effects on our community, because I believe the music is a huge part of what's going on today, in terms of us just coming together, or just in a relationship, man and a woman, um, micro level, a foundational level. There is no love in the music any longer. But there was once upon a time where Black people was making music for Black people, and that was very, you know, um, it was within the music. Now you don't hear it; it's absent of that, because it's no longer for us anymore. So when we start to think in those terms of what are the things that we need to do, we need to take some of our strategies back to the basic things we were doing, and just kind of coming together and think in the terms of creating Black Wall Street communities of 2024, and so forth.
Agree.
What about the idea of decentralized finance as an alternative to the conventional banking system? I'm told that one of the reasons that decentralized finance has such promise for us is because there's no room for discrimination in it. It's based on the blockchain. So if you go into a decentralized I guess, paradigm where you can borrow money or you can stake money or whatever. It's not tied to your identity. It's tied to a number, and then it's not controlled by one small group of people, but as a, it's a network that is involved in this. So if we get into buying Bitcoin, I mean, BlackRock is about to get a spot ETF, which is going to enable a lot of people to invest in Bitcoin, not necessarily own it, but invest in it. But if we can use that system to acquire Bitcoin and amass capital and wealth, then that's another vehicle that we have to transfer wealth to those who come after us, in addition to having the tangible stuff, the gold and the silver and the precious metals. What are your thoughts about decentralized finance as an alternative to the traditional banking system?
I don't know if an alternative would be good, but I think a diversification is always a good thing. When you think of in terms of like just diversifying, they say diversifying your portfolio. And I think when we see wealth, we need to see wealth and money as two very separate things. And I think a lot of times, we get confused by those two. And we've always had a lot of wealth, you know, and when you understand, when you take that wealth and you then translate it, a lot of times Black people, we gave things up willingly, almost like, giving up our birthrights. And we were sitting on wealth. We had the wealth. We have wealth in our communities. Like a lot of this gentrification is taking place because we lived on prime real estate within major cities, but we didn't recognize the wealth. And I think a lot of times we need to think about we got to change our mindset. And that's how we're getting beat. We're getting beat, mentally. And not to take away from what you're saying, and I agree with you. We need to look at all aspects, and we need to have our monies in various different almost portfolios, or just being diversified in how we split up our finances, in order to be successful. We can't just look at like one particular thing. But with that, we also have to look at our mentalities and changing our mentality. We thought we lived in ghettos. We thought we lived in impoverished communities, and someone convinced us of that. Thus, we didn't take care of these places, and we forsook them, and we abandoned them, and they became burnt, abandoned places. I grew up in the South Bronx. I remember being a kid, late 70s, early 80s, and walking through some of the areas, and it looked like Ukraine. Literally, that's what it looked like. And I always laugh about this today, and I tell people all the time, and like Reagan and Carter during the 80 presidential campaign, 1980 presidential campaign, both came there to, as a place of showing they wanted to come to the worst place in America. And that's where, I grew up. And like looking at what Harlem and certain parts of the Bronx look like now, and what we thought, what we were tricked into believing, things have totally changed. And you see the same story kind of happening in a lot of places that we migrated to. Because once we got there, someone told us that these places weren't really worth anything. So we have to change our mentality when it comes to wealth. Coming to wealth to understand that we're sitting on wealth. We have to take ownership of what it is that we're doing. And one of the things that Happy fosters within the film and also within the movement is ownership. It's owning not just property, it's not just the narrative. We got to own our narrative. We got to own our story. We got to be able to tell our story because no one's going to tell our story for us. We have to be able to own how we see, wealth. We got to own how we see our resources, how we manage our resources. These are things that are very important to us, and these are the things that I constantly see keep coming up again and again and again in terms of how we're winning or how we're losing, is because we don't have any ownership, and it's more so just an ownership of our destiny. And I think that's really the driver here is owning our destiny. When you look at owning our destiny, that's like this overarching theme or overarching umbrella to where it is to for our path into the destination that we're trying to get to. Is just ownership. And when you think ownership covers everything. It covers even down to the toothpaste you're using, the clothes you're wearing. It's everything. The books your kids are reading, it's everything. And when you kind of approach it from that standpoint, I was watching this video the other day, and this African brother, he was talking about that. He was Nigerian. He was talking about Nigeria. I think after the independence, how much money they owed, just after colonial, the post colonialism, and one of the ways they paid back the debt was they were just taking in all these imports, and nothing was produced there. Down to the very simple things, nothing was no manufacturing, no production. It was just all imports constantly coming in and in and in. And that's a problem. And that will cripple any monetary system. If you're not having any exports, you're not producing anything that you're consuming. We got to, and Dr. Clint Anderson speaks about this. We got to produce the things that we're consuming. And these are the things that we talk about, but I think, Powernomics is a great tool. Blueprint for Black Power is also a great tool. We had some very great minds around us that kind of show us what we need to do. It's just a question of, just kind of just doing it.
You know what, Brother Taaqiy, that's something that the brother Amos did say as well. Us being tricked about our neighborhoods, because you don't set up businesses in
Right.
poor neighborhoods. That's just not good. I'm not a business major, but I don't think that's good business strategy, by going into a hood or ghetto infested place to where there's no money flowing to set up businesses. I don't think when they was land when the Dollar Generals and the Family Dollars and the Arabs were land putting their plan together, their financial plan, they said we're gonna go down there where there's no money at. That's one thing they got us tricked in believing, that there's no money in the hood. But also, I'm going back to that cultural piece a little bit, and you kind of like mentioned it, what Dr. Claude Anderson said. Culture is also economic, and meaning that if our culture is set up in the tradition that we have a certain type of food or wear a certain kind of regalia and things of that nature. Somebody in the community is producing those things that we hold as a part of an identity, cultural ritual, and things like that. That's why, again, culture is connected to that whole economic piece a little bit. Like I said, we got a little bit of it, but if we really understood the whole gist of it as well, incorporate that how it also brings in that whole economic piece by us being on the same page. Like I said before, it's a type of indoctrination.
No,
I think it's
absolutely.
interesting. Yeah, I just want to get this in real quick. I think it's interesting, Taki, that you bring up this idea of ownership, and you juxtapose that against the mantra of the World Economic Forum, and that is you will own nothing and be happy, as they move towards tokenization of everything. So it won't even be possible for you to own. So this is a huge war that we're involved in, brother.
Yeah, yeah, and it's interesting to see this, kind of play out, and there's so much information out there, and I'm really trying to, do my research on just understanding like what's happening. A lot of it, again, I see this also a lot of good information and a lot of bad information. But one of the things that we got to keep in mind is no matter what we're hearing, we got to fight our fight. And any good fighter is going to tell you, never fight the fight of your opponent. Fight your fight. Do what you do best. That's the only way you're going to win. If you start to try to modify your strategies in a sense of trying to mimic your opponent, you're going to lose. Fight your fight. If you're a good counter fighter, that's the fight you're going to fight. And we can't get distracted. There's just so many distractions. There's so much going on in the world. There's this whole pandemic and all this stuff. There's so many distractions that we have. The constant distractions. The media is a constant distraction. This presidential campaign and all it's constant distractions. When you look at it, you'd be like, wow, they must really think we're stupid because the stuff. I mean, when you really, really look at this, it's like if you can't see this is a game that they're playing, like something's wrong with you. This is like, dude, you can't take any of this stuff seriously, and they're so blatant with the fact of what's going on. It's scary to the level to the brazenness of just how just how open they are with it. But the scarier part for me is the fact that people are still buying it.
But that's the confidence. That's how confident they are. They are. Yeah, that's how confident, because they sit up here and tell you stuff. If Trump got his people looking at him and watching him doing something, and they showing the videotape of him doing it, and they say, that's to let you know the state of mind of the people. So they like, shoot, we can just run and do anything now. Shoot, they're okay. They just going on and talk about the basketball game, and everybody wait for the preseason on the football game. Business as usual. So they can show you right in the face and put it in the movies right in your face what they doing, and we still
right. It's not even Trump. It's Biden. It's these two black men in Chicago and with this immigration, these migrants. There's just so much stuff that's going on that it just has me like dumbfounded. It's like, what is this? Like, what am I even watching right now? Like watching the news is like watching television.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Speaking of movies, brother Taaqiy, did you watch They Clone Tyrone?
I knew you was going to ask that question.
A little bit of it.
Yeah, I watched it. I saw
What
it.
What did you think?
I'm gonna give you a quote. Something I told one of my friends. This is my personal feeling about this. I don't like black trauma dramas. Like the Jordan Peele black trauma dramas, Get Out, those types of things. That's not but I thought the film was very well done. I thought it was very deep, especially for people who don't really have an understanding of what's going on. I think this film is excellent for those people. And I don't mean to sound condescending when I say that, but they're intentionally, there are large segments of particularly our population that just are unaware of what's happening. And you would hope that a film like that can kind of help you kind of wake up to certain things. Even though, obviously it was sensationalized, it was embellished, and it was theater and all those things like that, but there was some deep messages in there as well. From fried chicken, church, perms, like all these different things, pimps, hoes, hustlers. We see it in our communities, malt liquor, 40 ounces, which amazes me. And I've been telling people this for years. That was the most scariest thing to me, was something that was so popular and something that was so widely consumed for a period of maybe say 10 years, and all of a sudden just disappeared like that. You know, and it was something that only we consumed, young black men between certain ages consumed. Now all of a sudden just gone. You know, that's so when you start to see things like that, you know, you saw this. You know, we saw the St. Ives era. We went through that. And the brother in the film, John Boyega, you know, he was, I can't think of his character's name right now. Oh, Tyrone.
Fontaine.
Right. He coming out at the store every day with the 40 in his hand. That was something you saw every day. Now it's all of a sudden it's just gone. When you can have a people, the control of them to the point where they will consume something, you know, because you tell them to, then all of a sudden you tell them stop consuming it and they'll stop. That is amazing, because it's like, again, going back to ownership. You're not even owning yourself, because either you like something or you don't. You don't dislike it because now it's not popular anymore.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
If you like malt liquor, you like it and you drink it, and that's fine. But you're doing it because they're telling you to do it. If once they say stop doing it, you stop doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone has right, and everyone has stopped doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen this with our own two eyes. Mm-hmm. We saw this play out. There was a period where you had the Fontaine phenomenon in every bodega, every street corner. This is what happened every day, constantly, several times a day. Now all of a sudden it's just gone.
I got to say this. I got to say this, Brother Taaqiy. That's why I say that it's so important, and this is why the system itself is working so hard to maintain the media stranglehold and the imagery that they project out there. They have to do that because imagery is so important.
Oh,
it's so important, and I don't know how we're going to break into this field here, because we have to control those particular images. We all three of us is intelligent enough here to sit down here and recognize, just like you just said, just recognize the trendy type of things that they influence the people to do. And they could change up on you, get this Jordan, do this and do this. So that's control. They know they have that power. So we know what they're doing. So what are we doing in producing, far as imagery is concerned, to counteract the negative imagery or the propaganda or that type of narrative that they're trying to produce to evoke whatever type of energies that they're trying to evoke. We're not producing enough, and we're not in those positions to produce those things. That's why we need that conscious billionaire, to do that. Or here's the tag I got to put on this, because it seems so obvious to me, So the question is, why aren't they doing it? So is the whole corruption that deep to where if a person is conscionable to want to produce that type of stuff, but the industry itself is so corrupt and deep to where their life will be threatened, their livelihood, or they send the goons after you if you start talking about doing your own entertainment, basketball teams, doing bingo long in the All-Stars, creating your own networks, your own movie theater stuff. Is the man coming at you? Is he bringing the goons at you or what? Hey, you say reality, we got to deal with reality here.
Right. Bingo long and All-Stars. Let me I just wanted to say something real quick. I'm sorry. So the brother talked about imagery and doing, again, we're going back to ownership, right? Controlling your narrative. And we're going to go back to something Dr. J taught us a long time ago. And that's those who control the images, control the self-esteem, self-respect, and self-development.
Yes.
Simple, very simple, foundational. For me, that was the motivation for making films, just controlling the image, controlling the narrative. And Brother Vince, we'll make this real quick because I know you want to jump in. You asked a question earlier about the difference between our ancestors and us now. One of the things when I look at the ancient Kemet was the inspiration behind the society and the images that it promoted. It promoted positive reinforcement in terms of you're walking around in society and you see these huge images of people who look like you. You're looking in the mirror constantly. What I mean by that, you see these what they call statues of, or really they're three-dimensional hieroglyphs of kings and queens and divine principles, and you see all this positive reinforcement energy, and it only does one thing to you. It reinforces a positive mind state within you, and it encourages you to want to be greater, than yourself. It encourages you to want to be a better version of yourself. And I oftentimes think of people like Thutmose III, who's credited to being the greatest military leader in history. Him seeing the greatness of Menchu Hotep, who was 500 years before him, and how his military prowess. When you look at things like that, and you understand that these people, because we see time in relation to how we see time today, not understanding the ancient Kemet, was almost 3,000 long, over 3,000 years long, and that's debatable. But we're going to just stick with that time frame right now, just in terms of the ancient society, ancient system. And so before the pre-dynastic age, when you're looking at what they were seeing, so you have a Menchu Hotep and a Thutmose III who was about 500 years apart. And for us, that's really hard to comprehend, because the United States was 250 years old. But when you think 500 years and them seeing their great ancestors, is like, wow, I want to be like this guy. I want to be like this girl. I want to be like them. And that's kind of what they had, was that constant positive reinforcement. Just to your brother, to your point, Antonio, just the images and how powerful they were. They say the images what got, going back to Rome, got Julius Caesar killed. Because when Cleopatra was taking him up and down the Nile, she's showing him the images of the Nasut and the different leaders and rulers of old. And she's telling him, like, hey, these were the incarnation of God on earth. They were, the God king. So he goes back to Rome and he adopts that idea and says, I'm Caesar. I'm God on earth. They said, no, you're a lunatic. And they killed him. But immediately following that, they adopted that idea of Caesar's being the incarnation of the divine, which they got from ancient Egypt. So that narrative, just understanding the overall arching theme of who we are, is what created the Roman Empire, in the sense of the Caesars, them following, the Nasut to the pharaohs. I'm sorry, Vince. Go ahead, brother.
Well, no, I just wanted to give you your propers, because the question was about us creating the narrative. And that's exactly what you've done. We can look at a film like They Cloned Tyrone and we can realize that, yeah, there were messages in there and there was something in it for us. But then when you go to the final scene and you're in Compton, the uprising that happened in the Glen was a non-effect, because, it was business as usual. And I think that's the message that they want to leave with us, that no matter what you do, we still got you. So to your point about it being trauma drama, exactly. I see it exactly that way. And that's one of the reasons that I don't rush out to watch the next latest and greatest movie, because what really resonated with me at the end of that film, Taaqiy, is that the production company was Federal Films. And I'm like, oh, okay. So, CIA is in Hollywood, FBI is in Hollywood. They're going to give you some nuggets, but at the same time, they're going to put you in that place of submission to their agenda. And I looked at it from the perspective of predictive programming. So they have to tell you what they're doing so that they don't have to pay that karmic debt. Ooh. They tell you what you're doing and then you go along with it. There was a point in the film where Fontaine just basically threw his hands up and he said, hey, look, they're going to do what they're going to do. What's my responsibility? Right. And the truth was, you got to do something about it.
Yes.
And Yo-Yo, the divine feminine, came up with, look, brothers, which is what they do. Our sisters are the ones that are pushing us to be who we are, if you could agree. When you look at who's doing, it's the sisters that are doing. A lot of the brothers are sitting on the sidelines waiting for the sisters to do it. But what I'm getting to is the fact that we have to take ownership of our responsibility. And I want to commend you for taking that responsibility and taking this film to create a movement, because we have to have folks who are doing and not just talking about it. We need more Taaqiy Grants. We need more Amadeus Christs. We need more people who say, we're going to create the narrative, we're going to tell the story, and we're going to exemplify it in a way that shows us as being the great and mighty people that we are. I mean, even Black Panther. I mean, Black Panther was a great film, but they did the same thing. At the end of that movie, you at the United Nations, you in their territory, you in their playground. And then you get this real subtle endorsement by the European, okay, you know, we cool. No, we not cool. It ain't gonna be cool until we're calling the shots. That's
You
what
know what? Using this word, and thank you for that, brother. And I'm just using the word cool, you know, and just thinking of all the different sentiments that come up in my mind when I think of that word. You know, I had some issues with, like yourself, issues with Black Panther, and several of them, and I start with this one. Our story is non-fictional, right? We don't have a fictitious story. We don't have fictional Black Panthers. We have real non-fictional Black Panthers that must be mentioned, right? So we don't have to look to Marvel to give us superheroes, because we had real Black superheroes that Black Panther copied from. And that's the first thing. Second thing for me that stood out is when I just think in terms of the protagonists in that film, right? And how they made it, I'm going to make up a word here, how they made it uncool for the conscious Black person to be progressive, right? And this ties into what the brother Antonio was saying earlier. We need conscious Black billionaires, right, to move forward. Consciousness is not cool, right? Killmonger was conscious, but he was the bad guy. Black people see that, they don't want to associate with Black power consciousness because it's uncool to do that, and you don't fit into society being Black power conscious. It does not work. So this is why he had to be the bad guy. And I don't know why, by and large, well, I do know why, but this went over, you know, this is something that, the Black population, the predominantly Black audience took in, and they see that, and oh, this guy talking about, freeing Africa, this, that, and the third, and all this other stuff, liberation. Oh, we don't want to be like him because he's the bad guy. Come on, they just gave it to us, and we keep again falling for the same plays in the playbook. In regards to, brothers like Amadeus Christ and myself and the things that we've done in the film industry thus far, we are part of institutions. That institution that were created, we had ownership of just who we are and the communities and things like that, certain cultural systems. So I was, blessed to kind of be a part of a larger tree, if you will, so if I'm not connected to that tree, I'm not who I am, so those institutions and community centers that we had that were very pervasive one time in our community, that which are not so abundant in our community, but not so much now. We kind of got to get back to that. We got to get back to having places that we can come and congregate and fellowship and do the work and influence the next generation of people, because those are the things that are very essential and very foundational to who we are as African people. So, again, I was blessed to be in that environment, and just talking about just, going back to the ecology and tying in ecology to everything that we're doing, just being in that environment or being in that ecology or in that ecosystem produced a certain fruit. And I can say, I'm one of those fruits. I was produced, and FOI, fruit of Islam, just producing that fruit. And we got to create the environment to produce the things that we want to produce. And that's the kind of real takeaway here. When I look at, the film, Hapi and just thinking of the movement, the Happy movement. The Happy movement, in a sense, started before the film started. We made Nubia and Tekken before Happy. We didn't want to do Happy unless it was more than just a film. That's why you go to the website, it tells you that Happy is more than just a film. And if Happy was just going to be a film, I wouldn't have done it, because it's at the point where it got to be just beyond the entertainment piece. You know, we got to do something that's going to have lasting effects beyond people just being entertained for an hour and a half, 2 hours, and so forth.
Yes.
And to connect the film to this upcoming journey we have, it's the same principle in mind. We don't just want to go and ooh and ah for 9-10 days, because we'll do that. We'll go, we'll look, ooh, ah, and and then we're not having no real takeaways. When people watch the film, there are real takeaways there. People come with us to Kemet in February, there's going to be real takeaways there. Something that's going to have lasting effects beyond the 2 hours or the 10 days. And that's what the Happy Movement's about.
I agree.
Yeah. Again, you talked about entertainment. You talked about nonfiction. And when you look at some of the films that we've seen in the past few years, the story of Madam C.J. Walker, Harriet Tubman, so forth and so on, they were not solely based on reality. They were fictionalized accounts, and that kind of bothers me, because I'm thinking, well, if you're going to spend all this money to tell a story, tell it right. I mean, one of the things that drives film is conflict, right? That's kind of the motor for it. And we've had plenty of conflict in everything that we've tried to do. So if you just tell the story the way it really happened, you got your conflict. So why do you have to change it around? Well, you look at who wrote the film, and it wasn't us. So it's not us telling our story authentically. It's us giving someone permission to tell our story the way they want to tell it. And usually when they do it in a way that is detrimental to us. So again, we have to tell the story. And this message isn't to you, it's to those who are watching right now, who understand that we got to do something. And this is what we have to do. Art is so important in terms of informing our folks. When you go to those ancient places and you see the truth right in front of you, and it informs you, because it is a record of the past. It's a record. That's the true history, not what they put in the books. The things that are on those walls, those sacred walls, those things are unalterable. There's the record right there. If you want to understand what happened, there it is. So we have an obligation to see those things and to bring those things back to our folks, so folks really know what happened. But even more importantly, and I'm glad you made the point, our young people need to be able to look back and see who we were and understand that that's who we are now. So there are young Imhoteps in our community. You go to Africa, them brothers and sisters over there are inventing things. And then you come here and you see the sister that created a laser that can extract the tumor from somebody's body that has cancer. I mean, that's who we are. But if we watch the stories that they give us day in and day out, and we don't see us in there, we don't see us being creatives, we don't see ourselves as inventors. I mean, hell, we're here in Cleveland. Garrett A. Morgan invented the traffic light. Traffic light is in use all over the world. This is something that we did. When you go to your kitchen and you open up the refrigerator, thank a brother, because he created that. When you go to the store and you get your Lay's potato chips, we created the potato chip. When you enjoy that ice cream, that's what we did. Hamptonio, when you go to the golf course and you put your ball on the golf ball on the tee, thank a brother. Because before that, folks was creating a mound of dirt and putting the ball on top of a when you look at Kemet, we had plumbing systems.
Right. Something.
Go ahead, man. I mean,
I'm sorry. And what we have today, and sadly speaking, most of our brightest minds are incarcerated. There's some brothers and sisters in jail that are brilliant people, brilliant minds. One of the things that amazed me, even like going from an enterprise. And some people they were criminal enterprises, but they were developing and managing enterprises 15, 16 years old. They're brilliant people, brilliant minds, but just not applied properly and effectively. But we have, like you said, we have geniuses in our communities, but almost to the point of what Dr. Amos Wilson said about our communities. We got to see ourselves in our communities almost being synonymous. We bought the lie that we weren't worth anything. Like we were where we lived or who we are, just there was no value there. Because we think there's no value, we just throw it away. And you talk to these people, you're like, damn, they're brilliant. They're not, every criminal's not stupid. They may do stupid things, but these people are highly intelligent with what you would call, even with a they don't have much of a formal education in the sense of formal education, but they have very just instinctive intelligence. And that's one of the things that Africans always possessed. We always possess very with that God intellect, that God knowledge, that very instinctive intelligence. They say even, black babies, we perform a lot quicker than others do. Babies are just so much more intuitive to who they are and to nature, and they walk first, they talk first. Their brains are progressing at a much rapid rate, and this is very true to who we are as a people. We thought, we took to each we took Europe out of two dark ages. Let's not forget that we civilized Europe several times, because they had no notion of just what was happening around them. But
survival mode.
Survival mode, exactly. They were survival mode. But what's amazing, and I was going to say this earlier, one of the lessons here must be we have to learn from our enemy. We have to learn from our enemy. We have to respect our enemy a lot more than we are, because our enemy at least understood he don't want to go back into survival mode. He understands what he is doing. He's very intentional about it. We have to be, we're very reactionary to things, and he knows this, right? And black people, stuff happens to us, we scream, we holler, and he pokes us, he does things. I think they do it intentionally, and they laugh because we react to things a certain way. And every time something happens, they know exactly how we're going to react.
Respond. Oh yeah, they've been studying that for a long time. A long time.
They know how we're going to react. And a lot of times we react with our hearts versus our minds. We have to stop being more reactionary and start being more, intentional about things.
But see, but Taaqiy, but I think what comes with that is, something. Listen, Marimba Ani and other people. You got to study the history in the European on what he done. You stated earlier in the broadcast, they run in the same play for the most part. You know what I'm saying? Why if I'm gonna keep Jim Brown gonna keep going around the end, I'm gonna keep doing it till they stop. So that's what they do, and I think they got us so diverted, and it's on so many unnecessary and insignificant things, man. That even that, come on, man. Let's keep it real. Come on, we got to. I ain't saying they the brightest minds, but they the ones that is out there, the Cornel Wests of the world and things like that. Okay, Lewis Gates of the world. Come on, man. They don't know this. They don't know this. What's the deal? They don't know that we need to, for number one, like Malcolm said, how you still letting the system teach your kids, so we don't know that we need to have our own version of school and teach our own narrative.
Ownership.
Yeah, ownership. Yeah. Come on, man. Why are we pushing and boycotting for that? Laying that down, things like that. And lastly, Brother Taaqiy, I always mess up his name. I don't know why. What's Idris? What's the actor's name?
Idris Elba.
Yes, he's spearheading that project over in Ghana of building that $300 million movie studio and things like that. So I think that'll be interested to see how what kind of production would come out of that. I know in Nollywood in Nigeria, they doing some things as well, and it's just on a certain level. But it'd be interesting to see what kind of films come out of that, telling our stories. From I think it's more Americans going to be involved in that project, and that may be something that you can do and get on.
It's interesting. You speak of film, and you guys being there in the Midwest. I call the new Black Hollywood is right there in the Midwest with you guys in Detroit. Um, there are a lot of young brothers and sisters that are creating some independent projects out of Detroit, and a lot of it is their experiences. So you know what I mean by that. But it's not all bad content. I'm not saying bad content, negative based content like street kind of content. But I applaud them for having the courage. It takes a lot of courage to do that. Because you gotta put money up front. You gotta invest in this project, and you gotta believe that enough people come see it so that you can either make break even or make money. So there's a lot of things going on right here in the United States, just in terms of that, and from all aspects, on the production side, director side, writers, actors, and these people are doing a lot of great work. So there's a lot of things, kind of underground independent works that's going on. And again, I applaud a lot of them for doing that. I watch a lot of international films. South Africa has a huge film industry in terms of producing some really, really good content on the African continent, and from a film side, and like really, really like good films. And there's a lot of Black folks out there, and a lot of it, you don't see a lot of I haven't seen too many like historically kind of based dramas yet. There's been a lot of talks for a long time making historically based drama. They try to do that. Hollywood did that with The Woman King, but again, we don't want them telling our stories. We don't want them kind of doing those types of things, because they always, like you said, about Madam C.J. Walker and Harriet Tubman, they're going to pervert it, right? So we got to do it, because they're gonna make it for their audience. They're not making it for us, because all they see is dollars. And what they want to do is create a product that's going to sell, and that's how they convinced us to kind of sell our soul. That called the Judas effect. They gave us 30 pieces of silver to sell our soul. They gave us a bowl of lentils to sell our soul, and this is what we've constantly been doing throughout the history. They tell us like, hey, there's 10 million Black people in the country. You make music just for those Black people, they're only going to make this. If you change that and make music for everybody, and change the way the tempo and the rhythm and everything of the music goes, you make music for a much larger audience of people. And we keep selling our souls. They are not concerned with anything other than just selling. They look at numbers, they look at demographics, they look like what's going to sell. They want to just make money. That's the only thing they're concerned about.
I'm finna get in trouble right now. I'm finna get in trouble. Put me on a three-way, Vince. I'm getting in trouble. I'm not going to say something, but I'm going to say something. All that what we've been talking about here, and nobody, is afraid to address, and we can't address. This is just to let you know how powerful that industry is. Who is running that industry, and who is behind that? All this what we talking about. See, we can't. It's almost like that's moment. Don't you say nothing. Supposedly the most chosen. All this stuff we talk. Yeah, okay. Yeah, you see. You see. Supposed to be the ones that is in the text, the holy text. That's running all of this what we talking about. And we gloss over that. We gloss over what's all. It's a lot of evil behind all this we talking about here now. But we ain't saying nothing. Come on, man.
I'm gonna say this, and again, it goes back to just the ownership of it. And if you man, and this goes back to culture, and I was saying earlier about Americana. If the Bible is read by the vast majority, read and believed by the vast majority of people in this world, and not just, you know, Jews, Christians. If you believe that it's the sacred writings of God, and you know God ordained it, and this is what it is, and this is what it's going to be. If that narrative speaks highly of you, you're going to have a lot of control and influence.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have a lot of control and influence, and it starts there. Going back to your point with culture, that's what it starts. It starts with the reality is, you know, the Bible. You're thinking the Bible quote, right? It says that God created man in His image and after His likeness. The reality is that man created God after His image and after His likeness. Everybody has a God that looks like him, right?
Yes.
Doesn't take away from what the creator is. But if you have a God that looks like you, and once you get people to believe in your God or your version of God, they now, in a sense, and effectively believe or worship you. And if you created the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and people believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and that is your God, you are their God. Point blank simple. That's it.
Good point. Good point.
You control
And it's not a
everything.
knock. And it's not a knock. It's
No,
not a
it's not.
knock. It's the see. Here's the thing. You're supposed to do that. See, here's where the psychosis come in, as far as black folks is concerned, because we don't want to be. Oh, it don't matter what God look like. It don't matter what Jesus. It matters to somebody else out there. But see, with this macho culture, and we want to be,
Right,
oh, let's all get along type of stuff. But everybody else ain't thinking like that.
right, right.
So if your God don't look like you, that's just saying that you seeing the God that's is inside of you. So as I was a kid, 6, 7, 8 years old, Pastor said to me, he said, if a pig was able to draw a picture of a God, God would look like a pig. And that's just representing the God that's in you, seeing God that's in you.
Right,
That's all it's doing. But black
right,
folks got a problem with that.
right, right. And so it's interesting, you know, looking at God. I love black Jesus. You know, black people paint Jesus black and think that makes a difference. But the reality is Jesus is Jesus. There's no painting Jesus black. It's still European. And when you can paint it any color you want, but at its core, it is what it is, and you're still
Yes.
worshiping a white man. You call him Oreo, whatever it is, but that's what you're still worshiping. You know, uh, Dr. Nobles talks about power being the ability to define reality and have others see that reality as is their own. That's power. The white people, you know, I know a lot of white folks, and they were all mad, bent out of shape about Obama. Like, you don't even understand what's going on. You don't even understand what's happening here. You should be proud as a white person about Obama, because Obama is the symbol of white power, right? That is a shining example of what white power is. It's defining reality and have the others accept the reality as is their own. When you can take your culture and who you are and give it to a people that you subjugated, raped, murdered, pillaged, and have them look, talk, walk just like you've won. You know, but they don't even. I'm like, you people are real stupid. You don't even see what's going on here. Like that's a
God.
Right. But and so that's what we're dealing with, and this is why ownership is so important. They don't want us to control our story, because we would then turn that and having black people see themselves, see the real Black Panthers, and I want to be like this, and I'm you know, emulating these great people, and yeah, religion's a very powerful tool. We leave it like that.
Let me say this real quick. I know Vince.
I just want
real
to.
quick.
Okay.
Just real quick, I want to just say this. When y'all was talking about films, and Vince made the point about Wakanda and how they shaped that ending and brought you know the United Nations into the end of that thing, and we compromised, and it brings me back to Django, the movie Django, and I'm just telling you how it works on my psyche and how I was tripping. I was like, they sure gonna cut this black boy up somewhere towards the end of this movie. They got to cut him up, and they're gonna do him in good. And especially when he sit up here and shot that white lady and killed her, I was like, oh Lord, he don't done it now. Ain't no way he gonna live after all this. He don't shot him. So I'm saying that was very courageous for them to me, as far as that movie is concerned, because for him to stay alive and what they don't want to show that. I'm just saying, even when they do our black thing, they still got control of that narrative to keep the natives calm, because they don't want to instill any kind of ideology or ideas on anything dealing with liberation, stuff like that. Sorry about that,
And
guys.
that's the and that was a historical base, and that was a historical based movies we were talking about. Like I said, the only one I've seen thus far, and correct me if I'm wrong, was the Woman King. And again, that wasn't done by us. There was talks about Taaqiy Film and Mansa Musa Film. There's been talks about those type of historically based films, but to now Hollywood of anyone else have not want to take those types of projects on. I think Will Smith and some others were talking about it. But it'd be really interesting to see when a film like that is done on that scale by us. Not by him, obviously the Harriet Tubman film, but we need something on us. Just the last point on this, the infamous it's kind of going back to what we're talking about with the whole religion thing and the power of it, was the Good Times episode with the white Jesus and the black Jesus, and just the psychosis of that. We're dealing with this in the 70s. We're talking about this, people debating about this, and black folks. And it's really interesting because listen, to some extent, not black Jesus is, I guess, somewhat progressive. I still see it as two versions of the same coin, or two sides of the same coin. But that's that conversation between Michael and his mother, and just in talking about what Jesus looked like and what it was, and black folks praying to white Jesus is really interesting. It's really deep, and this is the last point I'm gonna make about this. We talked about the confusion and confounding of Africa. There's more white Jesus on the African continent than anywhere in the world. As long as you got that, it's game over. It's
Comfortable.
There's no, you can't fight that. You can't fight that. And it goes back to the cultural thing you're saying. And they'll mix African traditional religions inside Christianity, things like that. But the reality is you dealing with that white Jesus, man, and they believe in that white Jesus. They don't even deal with black Jesus in Africa.
Yeah.
It's straight white. It's not even, they don't even, you know what I mean? So yeah, we got some work we need to do.
So I want just a couple of points I wanted to make. One, just going back to Black Panther, y'all realize who saved Wakanda. It was the white dude that saved Wakanda. So you can tie that to that paradigm of Jesus, the white savior, blah, blah, blah. That went over a lot of people's heads, but they didn't go over mine. Second thing I wanted to point out is what we were talking about in terms of the Bible. And Taaqiy, you're a scholar in this. I want to bring folks back to King Unas and the blueprint for what the Bible was derived from. So 42 declarations of freedom from sin, 10 commandments. What was first? So we really want to understand something. We have to go back to the very beginning. And when we look at what we're reading and interpreting as historical fact and truth, we're not acknowledging who wrote it and gave it to us and used it as a justification for slavery.
Right.
So not only are we praying to someone who, we say this all the time, there was no J in the language. So when did Jesus really begin? When was that paradigm created? And then we look at the image that we got and we know where it came from. And then the reality of who Jesus really was, let that sink in. But I know I'm stepping on toes, and I'm feeling like Antonio was feeling a few moments ago when he brought up that subject. But here we are, there's truth and there's what they tell us.
Right. So, wow. So going back to this upcoming journey we have in February, there's several takeaways, and we've been talking about this for the last almost 2 hours now. But one of the other takeaways that we didn't mention is we see the foundation of spirituality, the foundation of religion, and in that you see the origins of the Christ story, the Immaculate Conception, the virgin birth, the death, the resurrection. You also see with the Annunciation, you'll see the foundations and the tenets of religion, particularly in Christianity. In not just Christianity, Judaism, Islam, you see all their foundations in Kemet. the brother Vince mentioned earlier a minute ago about King Yunus, or the favorite Unis, who was the first or the fifth dynasty in the originated in a sense of what they call the pyramid text. Between the fifth and sixth dynasty, the pyramids now are being inscribed, or the sacred chambers are being inscribed with the spiritual text that was the foundation for later on religious texts like the Bible and the Quran. You see it there. But that period is like to call the period of the great philosophers, not just the kings with the pyramid text, but also some of the great philosophical brothers like Menemos and Ptah. In fact, it's sitting here on the desk with me is a copy of the Hosea, Dr. Milanos Karenga's great work, which deals with the sacred wisdom of ancient Egypt. That sacred wisdom that he's speaking about there is the great writings of the pyramid text, great writings of Ptah and Menemos and several others from those periods that led the groundwork and the foundation for later on spiritual writings.
Yes. Thank you for that. I think that's probably a good place for us to button up things. There's been so much wisdom shared, Brother Taaqiy. I appreciate you greatly. This is more than just to talk about a tour of Egypt. This is to talk about our history, about economics, and the need for us to get our stuff together, because we can sit around and wait for other folks to do things for us, or we can be proactive, as you say, and not be reactionary and craft the story that serves us and pushes our agenda forward. So with that, I want to thank you for joining us. We kind of got a bonus hour. We don't do this too often, but the conversation was so great, I just didn't want to end. So I don't know what the broadcast product was at the end of the show, but again, it was important for us to have this conversation. So we're going to continue to let folks know about this. This won't be the last time, and hopefully we can share some of your sources so that we can get out the word to others, particularly some of the great scholars. We have conversations with Brother James Small, Dr. Jeffries, all of these folks that Brother Hamtonio has opened the door to us. So we want to continue that momentum and get this knowledge and wisdom out to folks so that they can understand who they are, and more importantly, what they need to be doing once they find out who they are.
Yes. I like that tie-in. Yes. Figure out once they figure out who they are, what they need to be doing. That's exactly it. That's all it. Right. Yes.
So as always, peace, prosperity, and progress. And I end my broadcast by saying, know yourself, love yourself.
Well, one more thing, Vince, before you close out, Vince. Vince, you hear me?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Give Brother Taaqiy that. Taaqiy, give us that last. How people get to the website. I know you got it scrolling, but mention it one more time.
For those people, and listen, this is going to be a historical experience when we go to the Nile in February 16th to the 25th. Discover the origins of economics in Egypt with Hapi, and is one of the most important things because we're tied in who we are but what we need to do. And there's going to be several people there. It's going to be with us in terms from an educational standpoint, certain level of economists, historians, and we're really, really, really tying it together from a unifying standpoint. We also have a clearance sale. I want to mention all our Happy merchandise, the film, t-shirts, things like that. HapiFilm.com. People go check that out. We're making room for new merchandise. So yeah, we get a lot of things going on, and we're looking forward to this next upcoming year. And I want to thank you, brothers, for having me. Like you said, normally our conversations maybe like 45 minutes. I really enjoyed it. And I have a problem kind of going over, and it was a great discussion. I look forward to the next one.
All right, my brother. Take care.
Right.
Peace.
Take care.
Hotep, I could say that. And you know what I'm saying. Hotep. And we'll see you next time.
All right, my brother.
All right.
Peace out.
Peace.